This is Business Live, the top stories this morning. Inflation eases slightly, but the Chancellor admits there is more to do to bring down living costs. Another delay for HS2, with ministers expected to admit there's no reasonable way to deliver it on schedule and within budget. Plus, why Kellogg's, Coca-Cola and Brewdog beer are all still on Russian shelves despite sanctions. Good morning. New figures show that inflation has eased in the UK slightly, but the Chancellor says there is still work to do to make people better off. That's according to the Office for National Statistics. It was 3.4% in May, down from the 14-month high of 3.5% in April, although that has been revised retrospectively. Falling transport costs helped, but that was offset by rising food and furniture prices. In a statement, Rachel Reeves said our number one mission is to put more money in the pockets of working people through our plan for change. We took the necessary choices to stabilise the public finances and get inflation under control after the double-digit increases we saw under the previous government. But we know there is more to do. Let's bring in our economics and data editor, Ed Conway.
When it comes to the cost of living, there are few more important data points than what's going on with inflation. But what's going on beneath the data? It's worth just looking at this. This is showing you the annual rate at which prices are changing. That's inflation, the consumer price index, and how much it's going up and down on an annual basis. Last time around, there was data in April. The ONS said it was 3.5%. They later then said it should have been 3.4%. But nonetheless, there it is in May, 3.4%. Now, you might have thought from looking at this chart that means a lot of the cost of living crisis is now over. Yes, inflation is still kind of a little bit higher than the Bank of England would like it, but it's a lot lower than those double-digit levels that it hit in 2022. But now I want to just show you the same data, but rather than just looking at the annual change, so the rate of change, we're going to look at the level. This is really important, OK, because basically what we're talking about here is your average shopping basket of goods and services and how much over time that price is changing. And you can see here, it tends to go up. And once it goes up, it doesn't tend to come down. That's important. When we talk about inflation, in practice, what economists are talking about with that 3.4% level, 3.4% change, is the difference between that point and that point, so over a year. OK, but if you're going to the supermarket and you're looking at the prices of things and trying to work out how much they've changed recently, you might not just be thinking about that difference, you might be thinking a little bit further back. And if you look back, for instance, the last 4 years, which I think, a lot of us do when we go to the supermarket, you're talking about a 25% change. And that's critical because that change over the last 4 years, if you go back through history, we have not seen a 4-year change like that going back to the early 90s. So when you feel like you're going through this cost of living crisis, yeah, that is borne out by the data, but only when you dig a little bit deeper and look at the levels rather than looking at that annual rate that we often talk about quite a lot. So that's the story with inflation. It's worth just saying, on top of this deeper issue with the numbers, there's a bigger question here, which is that is there more inflation in the pipeline? And actually looking at what's happening at the moment in the Middle East with Israel and Iran, when you look at what's happened to oil prices recently, they were coming down. But just in the last few weeks, just in June alone, they're up by 18%. So that's suggesting perhaps there could well be more inflation, more price rises to come in the pipeline. And that's before you even think about things like tariffs.
Thanks, Ed. In the last few minutes, we've heard from the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, who's given his reaction to today's inflation figures.
Well, pretty disappointing. 3.4% is the highest level it's been since this government came to office. When we left office, it wasn't up at 3.4%, it was down at 2%. And of course, that's going to mean higher food prices for people up and down the country. And it's a situation of this government's making because they put up, for example, taxes, national insurance, some of which was passed through by way of higher prices, went out and borrowed a lot of money, spent a lot of money and kept inflation higher as a consequence.
Joining me now is Lale Okona, Global Market Strategist at eToro. Lale, good to see you. How are markets reacting to this news?
Look, I think that market is understanding that inflation expectations are still high. We do not expect any rate cuts from the Bank of England this week, given the fact that obviously the inflation uncertainty is elevated because of the tensions in the Middle East and a spike in oil prices. Obviously, we're looking to see whether that is going to be a sustained increase in energy prices. But if that is the case, obviously, we expect caution from the Bank of England, and the market does price that in as well.
Yeah, we'll come back to what the Monetary Policy Committee might do tomorrow in a moment. But more generally, what are the big inflationary pressures? Because at a domestic level, when it comes to what people are buying, we hear that white goods, fridges and washing machines have got more expensive, food as well. But on a global level, we're talking about the oil price. Are we talking about the threat of tariffs too?
I think so. Definitely, tariffs is one factor. Obviously, there's again still a lot of uncertainty in terms of understanding where the level is going to end up for a majority of countries. As you know, we only have just one deal, and that is with the UK. And that does impact business uncertainty as well. So far, for instance, in the US, we're seeing the tariff revenues of Treasury account is increasing. However, that is not showing up in inflation data. And that does tell me that companies are taking the hit, and it's going to show up in the margins as well. And on top of that, again, the Middle East tensions is just another factor that is driving energy prices. Again, for that, we are looking to see whether it's going to be a sustained increase in prices.
Interesting, Lali, if companies are taking the hit on tariffs and not necessarily passing it on in an inflationary way to consumers, is that going to have a negative effect in other ways? For example, employment. We've seen unemployment tick up recently in the UK, as an example.
Yes, I think, again, if, say, in the US, if the tax bill does not pass with a sort of like a sterilizing effect of those tariffs for the businesses, that is going to impact employment there as well. Here in the UK, as you just pointed out, to some extent, the margins might come under pressure, as opposed to the US, that might impact employment as well. And again, that will impact the Bank of England's decision making as well.
Yeah, let's return to that. So the latest decision expected to be revealed tomorrow. I think a lot of people are expecting things to be held. But it's certainly, if we look at Ed Conway's figures, the expectation of interest rate cuts in the coming months has, well, that's shallowed quite significantly, and that'll be a concern for mortgage borrowers.
Correct. I think that, again, understanding that the Bank of England is way ahead in its cutting cycle, as opposed to, say, the Fed, we don't expect them to cut rates this week. However, I think August is very likely. Again, they will take into account the rise in energy prices, any sort of pass-through of tariffs into, again, to consumers as well. A lot of moving factors that they will have to take into account. But I think they will do, again, a cost-benefit analysis very similar to what the Fed is doing at the moment in terms of understanding whether they still have some room to pause and see those factors showing up in the price levels. And I think it's very advantageous for the Bank of England that they are ahead in their easing cycle, as say, opposed to the Fed.
Lala, just to finish off, I mean, historically, oil prices have been inflationary, and while things have gone up per barrel in recent days, we also hear at the same time that oil production is going to exceed demand this year. So that inflationary pressure might not be what it seems.
Correct. I think one positive thing is that the oil market wasn't structurally tight heading into this event. OPEC, I think, holds around 4 million barrels per day in spare capacity. And Iran is producing around 3 million barrels per day. So there is still spare capacity, which acts as a buffer. That said, again, a spike in markets in this asset class might lead to pressure on consumer spending and overall market sentiment as well. So I think, again, it all depends whether this is sustained, whether these tensions will be contained or not, or whether they will drag on for the next few months.
Who knows? We wait to see. Lale Akona from eToro, appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much indeed. Just a reminder, if you scan this QR code on the screen right now, you can read much more on inflation, including what it means for future interest rates potentially. That is on our Money blog. Scan the QR code right now. Now, the government's expected to announce another delay to the beleaguered HS2 project later on, admitting that the latest target is now virtually impossible. Sky News understands that the Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander will announce that the London to Birmingham line will no longer be ready to open by 2033. It's not clear yet what the new target will be. Joining me now is Dave Foreman, Chief Executive of PXN Group, a newly formed investment firm that is in the north of England. Good morning to you. Were you originally hoping that HS2 would be, we know it's not, of course, but would be servicing the north and being a benefit to you and your clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've announced today that bringing together two of the best investment firms in the north of England to create PXN Group. We've always been on the same mission to find and back exceptional founders and help those founders build innovative companies that can compete nationally and internationally. The HS2 news obviously is not great for the north. I think there's an entire ecosystem that needs to be built in the north of England around innovative companies, and not having that sort of infrastructure in place, not having some of that support from HS2 just makes it a little bit harder for northern founders to build companies that can compete internationally.
Do you feel, Dave, that you are succeeding because of government support or in spite of it?
Definitely in support of government support. So we work very closely with the British Business Bank. We work very closely with a number of councils and public sector bodies to help try and drive innovation and growth within the northern economy. So we're definitely working in partnership with the government, but to build something that thrives in the north for northern founders and investors who want to invest in the north, it takes the private sector, it takes the public sector, and it takes government. So it's a combination of all things, but we're definitely working very closely with the government to try and build something in the north that the UK can be proud of.
I'd like to ask you about a couple of figures recently, not least today's inflation figures staying stubbornly high at around about the 3.5% mark, and also unemployment going up. What's your take on those two key figures?
I think building businesses anywhere in the UK is currently really quite hard. I think the issue that we face here in the north, and something we think PXN is going to be able to help with, is for founders trying to build great companies in the north of the UK. You have a number of things that are challenging. One of them is inflation. That drives problems with unemployment, but also founders in the north have a real lack of access to capital. So we've always believed that there's loads of entrepreneurial talent in the north. But whilst that talent is abundant, access to capital is not. And that's just another sort of problem that exists when you're trying to build something innovative, genuinely consequential and genuinely world-class in our part of the world.
Just to finish off, I mean, obviously you're committed to it, but do you have to take a hit in other ways? I mean, we see much bigger companies, of course, deciding to shift their listings from London to New York, for example, because of easier capital, more likely investment there. Is something like that always at the back of your mind, that maybe someday you might have to move somewhere else if you want to expand and grow your business?
Maybe sometime in the very sort of long term, but I think right now we're focused on building a genuinely world-class investment firm in the north for northern founders and people who want to invest in the north. So our focus is very much here. We've got offices in Edinburgh, we've got offices in Leeds, and offices in Manchester, as well as a small office in London. And we're just trying to build something that is genuinely making a difference in the north of England and in Scotland for founders who are trying to build world-class companies. And we want them to stay in the north. So long term, if we achieve our ambitions in the north, maybe we'll look more nationally or internationally. But right now, our focus is 100% on the north of England and backing the incredible talent that exists in this part of the world.
Dave Foreman joining us from PXN in Manchester. Appreciate your time this lunchtime. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Now, more than 3 years after the Ukraine conflict began, Russia remains the most sanctioned economy in the world. Yet, despite its supposed isolation, its shelves are still stocked with Western goods. Our Moscow correspondent Ivor Bennett's been looking at why, despite many companies pulling out of Russia, that their products can still be found there.
Walk into a Russian supermarket and you wouldn't expect to see this. Shelves stocked with Western goods more than 3 years into the country's supposed isolation. The most sanctioned economy in the world really doesn't look like it. Among the companies that stopped selling to Russia after it invaded Ukraine was Coca-Cola. So in theory, its products shouldn't be available here. But have a look at what I just found on a trip to the supermarket. One can from France, Goût Original it says, another from Poland with the Polish writing on the side. This one's from Iraq, you can see Arabic clearly on the back, and I've even got a bottle here from the UK. They are known as parallel imports, products that enter Russia via third countries whether manufacturers like it or not. Coca-Cola declined to comment, but it's happening with other stuff too. Sky News has reported extensively on how luxury European cars are still coming into Russia despite sanctions. And now we've spoken to some of those who've imported them. In this Moscow showroom, we found a Porsche, a Mercedes and a BMW, all less than 2 years old.
Germany officially does not know that we import cars for clients from Russia. This is done through multiple moves. An order is placed, for example, from Turkey, then from Turkey it goes to Armenia, and from Armenia we deliver the car to Russia.
It's a long way.
Very expensive and very long.
Is Hyundai Training Academy, it still works.
Ararat drives a VW, which took 6 months to arrive from Germany via Belgium, Georgia, Armenia and Iran. He's imported dozens of other cars, including British brands, and insists he's done nothing wrong.
Armenia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, it's like European Union. So if the good hits Kazakhstan, for example, it's already not only Kazakhstan product, it's already a product of custom union.
You don't think you're doing anything wrong?
Illegal. No, you're not doing anything wrong.
What about morally? Some people might say this is not in the spirit of sanctions. Morally, it's questionable.
I don't think it's something from the sphere of immorality, you know. I mean, it's business and the business is to be done to feed the people.
It has made the cars a lot more expensive, though. Double what they were before sanctions, but he says nothing's too rich for Russia's super rich.
I don't think there will be any way to stop people bringing this car in, because people who want to drive Ferrari, I think they will not change to...
They'll buy the car no matter the cost.
Yes, they always have the money. And then where is a demand, there will always be supply.
There's definitely a different perspective here than before sanctions were imposed, but it seems they're not quite biting as the West may have hoped. Ivor Bennett, Sky News, Moscow.
Still to come here on Business Live, is the world at a turning point? Well, the founder of the Global Peace Index certainly thinks so, and I'll be joined by them after the break.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Now, given what's happening in Iran, Israel, Gaza and Ukraine right now, it may come as no surprise to you that the latest Global Peace Index has found that the world is in a more perilous place than it's been since the end of the Second World War. This year's index from the Institute for Economics and Peace found that there are currently 59 active state-based conflicts with 152,000 conflict-related deaths recorded, I think, since the start of the year. I'll be corrected if I'm wrong by Steve Killalay, who's the founder and executive chairman of the Institute for Economics and Peace. Steve, it's good to see you. Correct me if I got that wrong, but either way, a lot of people perishing in this year, and you're saying we're at an inflection point for peace and for businesses associated with that.
Yes, look, it's a troubling time, and obviously the events of the last few days just makes it more troubling. In Netanyahu's own words, he's fighting 7 wars. That's a lot of wars to be fighting simultaneously. But if we come back and we look at the bigger picture, as you mentioned, there are 59 conflicts raging currently around the world. That's more than any stage since the end of the Second World War. In fact, there are 17 conflicts with more than 1,000 people which have been killed. And we can see this concept of forever wars. So we're seeing a lot less wars are getting resolved than what they have in the past 60 years. But one of the facts which I think a lot of people are losing sight of is the rise of the middle-level powers. And we call that the great fragmentation. And that's neither a good nor a bad thing. But what we see is America retreats from the international stage, that there's a number of middle-level powers which are now rising, becoming more active in their region. So at this point now, we have 78 countries which are involved in a conflict beyond their borders. And that's part of the rise of these middle-level powers within their regions.
Who are we talking about with these middle-level powers? The ones who are sort of more part of the G20, for example, Brazil and India and those kind of economies?
Well, there's 34 of them which we put into this category, and yes, all those ones would be correct. Some of the other ones would be people like Turkey, let's say. That'd be another example. In fact, we went back to 1991. They're involved. They had what we measure as strategic influence. They had no countries which they had strategic influence in. They now have 10. And so that'd be another example. We could go over Vietnam, Indonesia. You could even see Australia as being one. So if we're looking back at 1991, there were 14 countries with what we'd call strategic interest in another country. And that's up to 34 today. And so this, I think, is one of the biggest changes which we're going to see in the geopolitical situation over the next 20 to 30 years.
Look, as concerning as the index seems to be, and certainly with a number of people dying, there will be others who always look for opportunity in adversity. We've seen recently, of course, plenty of countries talking about spending more of their GDP on defence. There are benefits there for those defence companies, as unpalatable as that may be for some.
Yeah, look, obviously all countries need the right level of defence, but it varies from country to country and what is the right level of defence. So one of the interesting parts of the findings we find from this year's report is we're looking into Europe, for example. They outspend Russia by 4 times the amount of money. In fact, the Russian economy is only about the same size as the French economy. However, when we look at the military capabilities of Europe, it's only 1/3 higher than that of Russia. So what we think is, like, obviously you need to have the right level of military spending, but rather than just increasing the military spending, it'd be more important to focus on the strategic alignment of the various European countries and how to rationalise the supply industries for defence.
It's an interesting point, Steve, that on the one hand, you've got some of this fragmentation of economies, but in other ways, countries perhaps coming together to try to solve these big problems that they're facing with more cooperation, not less. Really appreciate your time this lunchtime, Steve. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, that is it for Business Live for the time being. We'll be back with Jane Secker at 4:30 this afternoon. But before that, Jane will be bringing you, alongside Sam Coates, our Deputy Political Editor, Deputy Prime Minister's questions. The main players currently elsewhere. Keir Starmer, of course, been at the G7 in Canada, so it's their deputies who'll be stepping up to the dispatch box after this break.